Hello, hello. Uh, how is everyone's Saturday today? We are going live today to paint some palette pumpkins. So last night I painted these guys, and I thought I'd get on here and show you how to use palette knives to create these fun pumpkins. So I'm going to make sure that everything is a-okay. If you're able to join, say hi. Comment hi if you can hear me and see me okay. Make sure that everything is a-okay. Perfect. So, let's see. All right. So I'm using my new setup. Oh, that was the other thing. Let's just give me just another second. I believe I can zoom in with my phone, so I wanted to try that today while I had you guys on. Maybe. Oh, maybe it's working. Okay. So while that's trying to get connected, we'll just continue on. Hi, Jenna. How are you today? So I just wanted to hop on real quick and talk about palette knives and how fun they can be. I think a lot of people get nervous using palette knives because you do have to let go of some perfection when using these. They are very, just random. You're just scraping paint across the surface, and you're using that to create these shapes that then come together to create what you see here. So I've got two pumpkins, and I wanted to create this three-piece set. So I've got this larger piece of wood that I'm going to do a pumpkin with you guys today, and then I've got these two that will go with it. And they're just scrap pieces of wood that I had in the garage, so you could do this really on anything and have a fun some new fall decor. Okay. So I don't think my Zoom feature is going to work. But that's okay. Okay. So we're going to start with the background. And let me get my palette out of the way here. And I'm going to use just 3 palette knives here. You can get palette knife sets off Amazon, at any of the craft stores. You can even get a plastic set that I use occasionally from the Dollar Tree, and they are actually nice. They're not cheesy plastic ones that you think would break, and they work fairly well. I like using the plastic ones sometimes because they do have a little bit more flex than the metal ones, but you can get those there too, and those work just great. But I'm going to just use this little guy here with more of a rounded tip. And then I've got one that's kind of got a nice skinny edge to it, and then a longer flat one. Like I said, you get a wide variety in your set. You kind of get all different sizes, shapes. This one's good for making leaves and nice round areas. This one I like to use for mixing. Let's see. And then you also probably will get like a longer big one. And these longer palette knives are great for, trying to get paint on the background or a big surface fairly fast. So that's kind of what I use those bigger ones for. And I think that's about all the shapes that come with it. And they all come in varying sizes and things like that. So, but just your standard sizes would work great. And then you can build from there as you get more comfortable with them. Okay. So the background on this, on my set here, I used a white and a kind of a gray color. And for the gray, I used this barn wood from Folk Art. So I'm going to just get that on my palette. Maybe. I'm about at the end of it. There we go. And then a white. So for the background, I am going to use this larger palette knife, again, because I want to be able to put paint down fairly quickly, and I'm covering a large surface. So I'll put those two aside. So when you're using a palette knife, you hold a palette knife just like you would like silverware, and actually you're going to use the bottom of the palette knife to put paint on your surface, not the top here. That you don't do this, you just scrape it along the edge, kind of like a frosting palette or a frosting knife. I'm just going to scrape some of this old excess paint off. Okay, so when you're adding paint to your palette knife, you're going to scrape it up. So I'm going to put this right here for right now, and I'm going to blend these two colors, but I don't want them to be completely blended. I want to see some of those colors come through in my palette knife scrapes. So I'm going to just scrape and lift up some of that paint like that, and then just start scraping in different directions all over my surface. And so we can keep adding and building up our background. Now both of these paints are just craft acrylic. A lot of people in the videos on Pinterest and stuff use a heavy body, but it's not necessary. You know, I won't get the big, full, fluffy like texture that some of that heavier weight paint would give if I were using it. You know, with the heavier weight, you're able to create these almost like waves on your surface with your paint. But you don't necessarily need that to have fun with the palette knife. You can just use acrylic paint, just regular craft paint. And also, if that's all you have, but you do want to take advantage of that thicker paint and create all those great dimensions that you can with the thicker bodied paint, you can get an additive for this paint. I don't have any right now, and I can't remember the name for it. It's a medium, gel medium. I'll have to look it up. But anyways, you can get stuff to add to your already existing paint to give it that thickness if you want. Okay, so for the other side of this, I am simply going to use a fun and fast way to get paint on my surface, and I'm just going to squirt it right on my background, which is another fun way to use this paint, or the palette knife. The only thing I want to caution you on, though, is over blending. You don't want to over blend too much. You want some of those colors to come through. And of course, some of it is going to get blended. You can see I'm starting to get just some really light colored gray in areas, but I'm also able to see that white and the gray separately in my scrapes, which is what I want. And so just have fun with this background. This background is, all about texture and seeing these different colors. One, get blended, and two, just to see those individual colors in the different scrapes. So let me just show you this one. So after it dries, you're able to still see some of the scrapes that I've done. You still see some of that texture, which is super fun. And you can still see some of that pure white and some of the darker gray there. I'm just going to adjust my light a little bit here. And make sure I can see everybody. Say hi if you're able to hop on. And so we got to let this dry for just a few minutes. And that's the other great thing about just using craft paint is the acrylic craft paint dries super fast. So we don't have to wait too long for that. While that dries, I do want to remind you that we have a virtual paint party coming up. If you haven't signed up for it, we have the Witch Please paint party coming up September 16th. It's $15. The event's on Facebook, our Redbyrd Design Facebook page. For $15, you get the instructions, you're part of a private group, you get the tracer, and then also as a bonus, there'll be a video on how to create this palette board. So this is painted on a palette board, and I will have a video on how to build that if you want to use something like this to paint it on. But that's not necessary. You can always just paint this on a 16 by 20 canvas, because that's about the size of this. So it's kind of hard to see in my camera view right now, but there's the bottom. It's got the cat and the striped stockings, and so this one is so fun to paint and so cute. Perfect for Halloween. So don't forget about that. The sign up is open until the event starts. So if you get a late start, you can do that. Also, the video will be recorded. So if September 16th doesn't work for you, you can watch it on the replay later at whatever time's convenient for you. So with the virtual paint party, you obviously are going to need a canvas or the wood board. And also then you'll need paint and brushes is all that you'll need. And the paint list is fairly short, so not a lot of supplies that you need to get if you don't have art supplies already. Just a couple round brushes. You'll need maybe a flat brush for applying the background fairly easy. And then for paint, it's white, black, orange, purple, and any actual Halloween colors that you want to paint your witch and background, because that's all preference. It's just going to show you how to paint it, and you choose the colors that you love. So not a lot of supplies that you need for that one. Okay, so I'm going to, let's see, I painted the gourd, or it's kind of a funky shaped melon, pumpkin, whatever. I painted that one with the desert cactus, and then I did the small pumpkin with a harvest orange, and then I thought it'd be fun to do a larger pumpkin / gorge with this spa blue. So I really think those colors are pretty together. So, and then I've also used burnt umber, a dark brown. I've got a little bit of some dark green in there for some leaves, and then a black, the white, and what other colors did I use? I used a golden straw in the pumpkin, or the small orange pumpkin, for some highlights. And I think those are all the colors I used for this one. So it's still a little bit dry. I'm going to just blast it real quick with my blow dryer. Sorry about the noise. And I think I said it was still a little bit dry, but it's dry now. But let me get this up close so that you can see all that fun texture that palette knife gives you. And even with just the craft paint, I'm still able to get some dimension from that. I get the lines where the paint's kind of built up a little bit, and so tons and tons of texture, even without a heavy bodied paint. So if you want to play around with palette knives and don't feel like you need heavy body paint if all you have is craft paint. Okay, so I've got this, like I said, this pretty blue, and I'm going to start building the shape of my pumpkin. And again, I'm using the back or the bottom of the palette knife. You hold it like this. And I'm going to use my large palette knife to start with, just so I can get my shape out there. A lot of people also just, to get their shape down, will sketch their shape with a brush to start with, and then just to kind of get your idea going. So you could do that too. I'm just going to go right into that palette knife and start laying some color on. So again, when you're picking up paint, you're adding paint to the bottom of your palette knife. So you can see there, maybe, yes. You can see I have quite a bit of paint on the bottom of there so that I can get a nice, good scrape with that. So I pick it up and load up the bottom of my palette knife, and I bring it out to my surface, and then I flip it around, and then I start laying down that paint by scraping it around. And so to start with, I'm just going to create an oval shape or a pumpkin shape. I'm not going to worry about any of where the ridges are right now. Just want to get that first layer on. And I still have some of my background wet. That's okay. This is just kind of getting my shape out there anyways. So as I'm thinking about the bottom here, I'm also thinking about the shape of the bottom, and the shape usually has, where the ridges come down, we see that little bump at the bottom there, and so I'm trying to think about that as I'm building it as well, and create those little bumps that it sits on. And then also at the top, I'm kind of thinking about where I want my ridges. And don't worry about getting the pumpkin exactly symmetrical. That's not really realistic anyways. And with the palette knife, you're not doing a realistic painting anyways with a palette knife. It's all more abstract, more about fun scraping textures, and less about realism. Don't be afraid to move your canvas around so that you're able to scrape in the direction that you want to, and you're not trying to force your hand to do unnatural turns and things like that. Alright, so we got our first coat down. So we've got this large kind of squatty pumpkin here. And the next thing I'm going to do is my second layer. I always add my dark value. 1 second. Just make sure that everything's still working okay. All right. So my dark values always come next, and I apply where I'm going to create my ridges. So in this case, with this small pumpkin, I've got a ridge here. You can see some of the darkness there. I make sure that I outline my pumpkin there. I've got a ridge here and a ridge here. And so I'm going to use that burnt umber to define those areas where that pumpkin is. I've also added some dark areas under here where the pumpkin's kind of sitting on the table or sitting on a surface. That area is in a shadow, and so I use that dark umber. And it's going to look pretty terrible to start with, but this is the second layer, and then we'll come back and add more layers on top of this. So to start, I didn't wash my brush. It's fine that these two colors mix. Not my brush, my knife. I didn't wash my knife. And now at this point, I'm going to add just the dark brown to the tip of my palette, because I'm going to use that to scrape along those ridge lines that I'm creating and the outside. You could also use this smaller palette that has the smaller tip if you wanted to, but I don't need all of that precision, I guess, and you really can't get precision with a palette knife, but the smaller tip can give you that. Like I said, I'm just creating some shadows right now, so this larger tipped palette knife will work fine. So I add my color there, and I'm just going to scrape around my edges and just use a very light pressure so that I don't deposit all of that paint right away when I'm scraping. I want to carry that around the edge of my palette. Okay, and then I'm going to create a ridge right here. So I'm going to start at the top and just bring that brown right through the blue. And just very light scrapes. Like I said, I don't want all of that brown. If you press too hard on the surface, you're going to deposit all that brown paint right where you press. So it's just a very light scrape to drag that around. Okay, and then we'll get this little ridge up here, and I've got a ridge here. So like I said, it doesn't look all that great right now, but we will be adding layers, and it, you know, each layer then adds a level of dimension and helps, you know, that pumpkin look more real in an abstract way, I guess, instead of just flat paint. So down here where I have the pumpkin that's going to be sitting on a surface, I'm going to add just a little bit more brown down there for the shadow. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to give this, well, no, we're going to go right over with it with the blue and kind of start blending those colors together. So I'm going to go back to my blue using that same palette knife. I'm going to come in and just gently kind of blend that color into those areas. But it's not going to be like a brush blend. You're not going to get a nice blend of the blue with the brown and a nice gradient blend that you would or could get with a brush. It's going to be more just some scrapes of the blue. The dark might show in some areas, but we're just going to kind of work that blue into those that brown ridge line. Okay, so we've kind of softened those that brown area a little bit. Just scraping that paint around. And now we're going to let this area dry for just a few minutes, and we'll put in our stem and the surface that our pumpkin is sitting on. And so for the stem, I'm going to use that dark umber, and then for our dark umber and black, and I'm going to also use that for the table or surface. So I'm going to start with just that dark umber, and I'm going to come up here and scrape in a stem. And your stem can be as big or as little as you want. You can use the brush to sketch it in to start with, and then come over the top of that with the palette knife to give it the texture. So we'll do that for the stem, I think. And I'm going to go and grab just a little bit of black and add some black scrapes to that just to darken it up a little bit. Alright, so now let's do the bottom here. I'm going to use a blend of the black and the burnt umber and just start scraping that color along the bottom. And I'm going to go just about an inch up past the bottom here, so the surface or the horizon line of my tabletop or whatever it is about right there. And then I will work my way across here. Palette knife, working with palette knives on a wood surface is super fun as well, because the wood isn't exactly flat, and so you get all these great scrapes and textures just from the wood itself. Okay, so I'm going to add just some scrapes of some black where the pumpkin is touching the surface or table, right down in these ridges here. Where that shadow would be, and it would be a little bit darker there. Okay. And then I'm going to grab some of this blue that I have here. I like to add colors of my main object into the surrounding area. So I'm going to just scrape a little bit of blue down on the table or that surface. Add some of that color in there just to lighten it up a little bit. So my pumpkin is still pretty wet, so I'm going to give it just a few more minutes to dry, and let's go add a leaf at the top. So I'm going to get some of a lighter color green. This is the green I used for the gourd. It's desert cactus, and then a dark green to add some dimension, some shadow. And I'm going to start with the light green and just get my shape down. I think I'll put a leaf over here. And I'm going to actually switch to the smaller tipped palette knife just to give myself a little bit more control around the pumpkin. Okay. And then I'm going to grab some of this dark green and drag it along the bottom of my leaf. And then another thing that you can do with palette knives is use, instead of just the bottom, you can actually use the edge of the palette knife to draw a line or to draw kind of a thin straight edge. So I'm going to load up my edge of my palette knife and I'm going to just gently drag it through the center-ish of my leaf, and that will give me that nice line there. There we go. I'm going to add just a little bit of green to the top of my stem. A little bit more brown in there. I'm going to grab just a little bit of white and add some white to the top of my leaf here. And also add some white to my stem. Okay, so my pumpkin's getting dry, and so we can start layering more color down. And let's do this small little palette knife to kind of give me some area so I don't scrape too much in an area. Having that smaller blade does help, because sometimes as you're adding paint to this, you can start to get paint down here, and if you're only wanting to paint with just the tip, I find that I forget that paint can get down there, and then I end up with color everywhere. So having a smaller blade like this really helps offer just a little more control when you're layering color. So I'm going to layer some white and some blue onto the back or the bottom of my palette, and I'm going to just start adding color on top of my pumpkin. And I'm going right over the brown. Adding the highlights. With this white and then the blue as well. And I'm just lightly scraping that on. There's some areas that are still wet, and so if I pick up too much color that's on the canvas or on the piece of wood, I just simply wipe my palette knife off and pick up some new color. So right here I picked up some brown on the back of my palette, so I'm just going to wipe that off on a rag. I've got a clean palette. Now I can go back and get that blue and then white there. So I don't want to push any more brown around. I just kind of want to bring in some light color now. There we go. It's starting to look a little bit better. It's pretty shiny in the video. It's kind of hard to see. I'm gonna grab just a little bit of the brown. And just darken up this bottom bit here. All right, what do you guys think? Let me see if I can bring it in so you can see some of that texture. I'm not going to glare from the light. That blue is so pretty. You just need to smooth this area out just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so I am going to then, like in the little pumpkin, after I got my colors in there, I came back and then just kind of tried to use the edge of my palette knife to show some fun outlines with a black/brown. Not a lot, and I didn't scrape too much there, just to kind of bring out those rigid lines. So I'm going to go back. I'll actually use this very narrow knife, and I'm going to use the edge of it to scrape some lines around the pumpkin. And I'm going to turn my canvas so I can work a little bit. And I'm going to just do a blend of black and brown. And so I've got some paint just on the very edge there. And I'm going to drag some lines around. And I'm not going to get, you know, the exact circular line you would. And you can also then just use the tip. So then if you just add paint to the very tip, you can use it as kind of like a pencil. Again, lightly drag your palette knife so that you don't deposit all your paint in one area. And you're able to drag it around a little bit easier. that just helps just define those ridges a little bit more. And I think I'm going to actually add another leaf up here, a second leaf maybe coming down covering the pumpkin. So I'm going to go back to my larger palette knife and grab some green. And my paint is still pretty wet, so I really am going to just gently add the green right on top of all that blue right there. Okay, so then I'm going to grab some of that dark green and add some scrapes of that. Grab a little bit of white. And then to help tie all three of my elements together, I like to add each of the colors into the others in some form or another. So I'm going to grab this yellow and add a little bit of yellow to my leaves. Add a little bit of yellow to my stem. And then let's grab some of this orange and add a couple scrapes of the orange inside the pumpkin here. And then maybe on the tabletop. Just add a little bit of orange down here on the table. There we go. All right, that is a palette knife pumpkin. Let me put them all together. Let me know what you guys think. I'll lift it up first so you can see it a little bit better, because I know with the light there's a little bit of glare on some of that wet paint, but you can see all that fun texture. Just kind of a rustic old looking pumpkin. So we've got the blue, we've got the green that goes with it, and then the smaller one. So this is a really fun little decor item, I think. You can then layer them on a shelf, maybe like this. So anyways, I hope you guys, I hope it took some of the mystery one out of the palette knife for you. I hope you experiment with the palette knife. It's so fun. You know, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking at first because, like I said, you have to let go of the perfection of, you know, a leaf should look like this, or, you know, there's some scrapes here that happened when I was using the knife that made my pumpkin not extremely smooth, and all of the things that come with that. But after you let go of that, they are so fun. They're fun to experiment, where what would happen if you scraped a color here on top of this, and it just makes it a lot of fun to paint with. So that's that. I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions with a palette knife, where to get a palette knife, I'd be happy to help, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks a lot, guys, and have a great day.